Okay, so thank you everybody for coming to my panel. Video games is literature. I slapped a 101 on there, but you know, this can be whatever level course you want it to be. So I am the writer of the blog videogamesaslit.com, otherwise known as Video Games is Literature, because I couldn't come up with a better name, so I just called it exactly what it is. So you can see on there the web address if you want to visit it later. I also have some cards up here if anybody's interested in actually looking at the website itself. Okay. And also just FYI, we're on Instagram Live also. Just for accessibility purposes in case anybody couldn't make it here. So, all right, so first I wanted to tell you guys what Video Games is Literature is actually about, because I'm assuming most of you probably haven't looked at the blog yet. So basically, I look at, and occasionally I have guests, and we look at video games kind of in the same way that a teacher, I don't want to make this sound like it's a stuffy college course, but I look at games in a similar way that, a class might look at books or more nowadays movies or film. So I look for literary elements in games. Those might include narrative, especially interesting narrative elements, like in the game Bastion, or some of the ones that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about Fallout, and of course the Elder Scrolls games, very interesting, different types of narrative. I look at, the plot, obviously, if there is a plot. And sometimes even if there isn't a plot, all games are fair game. Metaphors, of course, if there are any metaphors or literary references, those are some of my favorite things. I always love pointing out references. And I put literature education on this list because, I like, especially games that are educational games. I know they're not the most popular, but if there are games that are educational and also fun, I love those, so personally. So I'm starting out with games that are based on Hamlet. So first I'm going to ask, who's actually read Hamlet or seen the play? Okay, that's good, a lot of people. That's good, okay. So if you haven't seen the play or if you haven't read Hamlet, have you seen The Lion King? Raise your hand if you've seen The Lion King. Okay. So yeah, The Lion King is basically the plot of Hamlet. It's based on Hamlet. The only difference is in Hamlet, everybody dies. So most of the lions don't die, thankfully. So I've noticed, especially very recently, that Hamlet specifically is kind of it's a genre of video games. There's so many video games that are based specifically on Hamlet that you could almost call it a genre. So the first game, has anybody played Elsinore? Raise your hand. Have you heard of Elsinore? Okay, so a few people at least have heard of it. So this is, it's a fairly recent, I think it came out in 2019. It's a pretty recent game on Steam. It's an indie game. And it's pretty much, it's a pretty faithful retelling of Hamlet, except that you're playing as Ophelia. And so, okay, so keeping in mind the plot of Hamlet, everybody dies, right? So Ophelia is going through the game, you as Ophelia, you're going through the story of Hamlet, and then Ophelia actually dies halfway through the play. So she gets killed, and then it turns out this game has a time travel element to it. And so she gets killed, and then she goes back to the beginning of the story again, and she now has to solve the mystery of who kills her, because she doesn't actually know who it is that's going to kill her. And so you're playing the story of Hamlet over and over again. Like, so, once she figures out who kills her, then she gets farther in the story and she finds out, oh, okay, now everybody else dies. And so it's actually an extremely, I think it's a really fascinating game. Even though it's an indie game, a lot of people think that indie games are just usually 5-hour games that can be good, but usually pretty short. But this is a really well thought out, well developed story. And the thing that I really like about Elsinore is that it takes the story of Hamlet, which, while Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play, it's still, basically the length of a play. It's like a long movie. And Elsinore, you can play it for hours and hours and hours, and you get to learn more about the characters. You get to learn more about Ophelia, more about her father, who in Hamlet, since you're following Hamlet's point of view, he sees Ophelia's father as just kind of a doddering old man. So yeah, Elsinore is really interesting in that you get more of the story. And so this is the kind of thing that I look at on my blog. The ways that video games can tell a story even more so than maybe even a book or a play or a movie, because books and plays and movies have time constraints, and a video game can just go on for hours. So Elsinore tells the story of Hamlet more so than Shakespeare was ever able to tell us that story. The next game that I have played that's based on Hamlet is called To Be or Not to Be. Has anybody played this game? Raise your hand. Have you heard of the game? Okay, so To Be or Not to Be. Okay, let's see. To Be or Not to Be is a video game based on a choose-your-own-adventure style book based on a play. So it's so it's actually, it's really interesting to me in that way, but I'm a nerd. Have you heard of Ryan North? Does anybody know Ryan North? Okay, one person. Do you know Squirrel Girl? Okay, so Ryan North is the guy who created Squirrel Girl, or one of the people who created Squirrel Girl. So yeah, he's the guy who wrote the To Be or Not to Be book, and then they turned that into a game. So it's another game that's just a direct retelling of Hamlet, except that you play it as a choose-your-own-adventure style thing. Hopefully you guys know what choose-your-own-adventure is, because I'm kind of old and those books were out when I was a kid, in the 80s. Okay. So in this game, you can either, you can choose to just play the story of Hamlet, the way that it goes, or you can choose to be a pirate. It's honestly, it's a much sillier game, and it's really fun, and it's probably better if you have a general idea of the story of Hamlet, but definitely check that one out. It's more text-based though. It has illustrations, but it's still, I think it's a really cool game. Okay, and then the next game on my list is not an indie game. This is Final Fantasy 15. Raise your hand if you've played Final Fantasy 15. Okay. Now, raise your hand if you are aware that Final Fantasy 15 is a direct retelling of Hamlet. All right, a lot of people. Okay, so I have a master's degree in literature, and it took me, I think, about 100 hours of playing Final Fantasy 15 before I realized, wait a minute, this seems really familiar. Okay, so the way that I came to that conclusion was very, very slow. It was more than just like, wait a minute, because I saw the villain and I was like, he sounds a lot like Jeremy Irons, who played Scar in The Lion King. And he kind of looks like Scar too. And then I was like, wait a minute. This whole game is a lot like The Lion King. Anyway, I got there eventually. So I know a lot of people complain about Final Fantasy 15. I love the game. I love the game, especially since I found out that it's Hamlet. But a lot of people complain about it, and I wonder if they would if they realized that it's a retelling of what is apparently one of the most popular stories in literary history. And I say apparently because not only are so very many games based on Hamlet, but I mean everything. I mean, The Lion King is one of the most popular Disney movies. So basically, the moment that I realized that, the moment I finally put all the pieces together, I got on my blog and I made a silly little cast list post. So I'm putting that on here. So I pulled out my Riverside Shakespeare. Actually, it's my mom's copy of the Riverside Shakespeare. I have the Norton Shakespeare, so I just like copied the cast list from like the way that they actually said it in the Riverside Shakespeare. So we have the names of the actors: Hamlet, son to the late king, of course, there he is. We have Horatio, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern, friends to Hamlet. Ophelia, poor Ophelia. Laertes, brother to Ophelia. There's Claudius, King of Denmark. And of course, the ghost of Hamlet's father, played by Sean Bean, who always dies. Some people know him as Ned Stark. And then some of you may recognize the understudy for the part of Hamlet, Richard from Tales of Graces. I had to throw him in because before I played Final Fantasy 15, I played Tales of Graces, and Richard is another young prince with uncle problems. So, okay, so those are basically the main games that I have played that are based on Hamlet, or at least that have elements from Hamlet. There are a few others that I've noticed that I haven't really played, or I haven't spent a lot of time with. I'm assuming most of you know the game Don't Starve. Yeah, okay, so I think fairly recently, they released a DLC for Don't Starve that's based on Hamlet, and I haven't played that yet. Don't Starve is a little hard for me, so. There's another game, I figured I should mention it, but It's a point-and-click adventure type game that's on Steam, and it's called Hamlet, or the Last Game Without MMORPG Features, Shaders, and Product Placement. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, I tried to play it for about 5 minutes, and it really wasn't my thing. So, Vagrant Story. Has anyone played Vagrant Story? Okay, yeah, someone really likes it. I have not played Vagrant Story yet. Like, that is one of the biggest regrets of my life, but you know, it's hard to get nowadays, so definitely hoping for a remaster or something soon. But Vagrant Story, I've heard, has several references to Hamlet in it. And then, of course, I have to include The Lion King on Sega Genesis and SNES. It's one of the best games from that generation, so. Okay, and then Tales of Graces, I already mentioned. There are also, like other Final Fantasy games. Like, there are a lot of Final Fantasy games that have Shakespearean themes. 15, I think, is the first one that's like a direct retelling of a Shakespeare play. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention Final Fantasy XII's Balthier. He definitely behaves as though he thinks he's a Shakespearean hero. If you've played 12, you know that Balthier believes he is the hero, and he is, he's the hero. And then that brings us to Final Fantasy IX, which is the next one that I'm going to talk about. So back before Final Fantasy 15 was out, I wrote a piece about Final Fantasy IX. And at the time, Final Fantasy IX, I thought, was the most Shakespearean Final Fantasy game. So how many people have played Final Fantasy IX? Okay, all right. So, yeah, the rest of you should definitely play it. It's on Steam. I think it's on Switch now. It's remastered all over the place. Okay, so in Final Fantasy IX, at the very beginning of the game, they're putting on a play, and it's called "I Want to Be Your Canary." I'm not sure where the title of the play comes from. "I Want to Be Your Canary." I don't know. Does anybody know where that title comes from? Okay, well, I haven't done a ton of research on that, but the supposed playwright who created "I Want to Be Your Canary" is a fictional guy named Lord Avon. Lord Avon is supposed to be Shakespeare, and Avon is a reference to Shakespeare's birthplace. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon. So, "I Want to Be Your Canary," they're putting on this play, and it's basically Romeo and Juliet. It's very similar. And it's, lovers, and they die at the end, and we the player don't really get to see the whole play, we just see parts of it. So this is the part where I'm actually gonna spoil Final Fantasy IX, so does anybody have a problem with that? I guess you can cover your ears, or I don't know, it's like a 20-year-old game, so. Okay, so there are several, like, aside from the direct reference to Shakespeare where they're putting on a play and it's like obviously a Shakespearean play, first off, there's a character named Puck, and he's like this little rat boy, and you could see that as being similar to like a little fairy boy or like a little imp, like in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where there's a character named Puck. and he's a trickster, and the character in Final Fantasy IX is also a trickster. And then the spoiler is the concept of separated twins, because Shakespeare loves twins. In several Shakespeare plays, he has separated twins, and when twins get separated, and like apparently even if they're fraternal twins and they're a boy and a girl, they still look exactly the same, and apparently that is, like the highest comedy, apparently, according to Shakespeare. So we also get this concept of separated twins in Final Fantasy IX, and that Zidane, the main character, and Kuja, the main villain, are actually twins, in a way. So, that's probably an intentional Shakespearean reference. And then we also, of course, have a major regicide, which you see elsewhere in the Final Fantasy series 15. Regicide being, of course, killing a monarch. In Final Fantasy IX, Queen Brahne is killed, and Shakespeare probably loved regicide more than he loved separated twins. Like, many of his plays, many of them involve somebody killing a king, and occasionally a queen. So, yeah, Final Fantasy IX is, it's like traditionally my favorite game. But 15 is kind of like getting up there, because like the more they get into the Shakespeare, I don't know. I'm a nerd. Okay, so I said in the description for this panel that we were going to be talking about popular games, and then I decided I was going to talk about Final Fantasy IX, which I know is a really old game, and even Final Fantasy 15 is kind of old, but hopefully a lot of you have played at least one Fallout game. Do you have a question?
It's not really a question, but as far as Shakespeare and Final Fantasy goes, I think the most overt retelling is that, I'm not sure if you played 14, but the Shadowbringer story arc is pretty much a direct retelling of the Tempest.
Oh, really?
It's also got a lot of allusions to Thomas More's Utopia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
City called Amarot and stuff like that.
So yeah, I haven't played 14 like at all. Just because I kind of try to stay away from MMORPGs. But I really want to play it. Like, I do really want to play it. So.
As far as like literary goes, the later ones of 14 are
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do that soon.
You can treat it like 4 JRPGs wearing a trench coat.
Yeah.
Okay, I know, I really need to play it. Like, everybody else is playing it, and then that thing happened where, was that Final Fantasy or was that World of Warcraft, where like everybody logged in all in one day and they had to beg people, they had to beg people not to log in.
But they started like giving discounts on their other Final Fantasy.
Right. Yeah, so, I'm definitely planning to play that. I just, haven't gotten on that boat yet. Okay, so Fallout. Raise your hand if you've played any Fallout game. Okay, good. That's most of you. All right. Raise your hand if you've played specifically Fallout New Vegas. Okay, good. Because New Vegas is my favorite, and that's the one that I'm mostly going to talk about here. Okay, so first off, war. War never changes. Does anybody know where that quote originally came from? Okay, so that was a trick question because it does originally come from Fallout. But I wanted to make sure before I did this panel that it wasn't actually from somebody else, and I did a little bit of research. And apparently a lot of people attribute the quote to Ulysses S. Grant. But, I mean, there's no, like as far as I could tell, and I didn't do extensive research, but there doesn't seem to be actually any published material that shows that he said that. But my point here is that the quote, "war never changes," is already pretty pervasive in society. And it's a video game. Video games are literature. You can't deny that. And not only that, I mean, Fallout, a lot of people, if they haven't played Fallout, they look at it and they're like, this is just some dumb first-person shooter, you know? But it's a lot more than that. It's so much more than that. So, obviously, if you've played it, you know how Fallout, it melds real history with, Fallout history. So you can actually learn a lot of real history playing the Fallout series. Like when you're playing Fallout 4, which takes place in Boston, right? And you can visit the Boston Library, and it's basically the Boston Library. I mean, it's like you're visiting. And the Boston Library right now hopefully isn't as in disrepair as it is in the game. But I mean, you can play Fallout and you can visit places that you maybe wouldn't have visited otherwise. You can do the Freedom Trail, is that what it's called in Fallout? Yeah, which I didn't even know was a thing, but now I kind of want to go do it in real life. It's really interesting how, you have real history and then you have the history of what happened in the Fallout game. So the screenshot that I have up there, I don't know how well you can actually see that, but that is a journal entry from New Vegas. I'm pretty sure it's from New Vegas. And it's basically somebody explaining in real time what's happening with the bombs that have destroyed all of America and presumably the rest of the world. And Fallout, nowadays a lot of games use those kinds of journal entries to tell their story, but Fallout was one of the early games that did that. Instead of, watching a cutscene where somebody just explains everything that happened to you, you actually have to, if you want to know what happened in the world of Fallout, if you want to know why everything is destroyed like that, you have to actually look at the computers and log into the computers and read people's journal entries and listen to recordings and things like that. That's the type of storytelling that you can't get from a book. There are some books that try to do things like that, but for the most part, a book is just a narrative, cover to cover. You read the words in order and you're done. But in Fallout, you can get the story in any order. You can even not get the story. You can even accidentally miss super important things. So the creators of Fallout, they have something called the Fallout Bible, supposedly. I've never seen it. And that helps them keep track of everything that they need to know about the world that they're creating. Because there's so much going on in the Fallout games, the human brain probably just can't even contain all of that. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about the Fallout series is that each of your companion characters has a vast story of their own. I mean, they have their own entire life. It's not like if you're reading a novel and there's a side character and you're like, you know what? I haven't heard from this character in like 250 pages. What happened to them? I mean, in this case, you can devote hundreds of hours to just learning about this one person. Or, and my favorite example is Boone in Fallout New Vegas. Boone, he is a missable character. You could just walk right past him. You could just like totally ignore him. You could be like, that dude has sunglasses and he kind of looks like an asshole, so. You have a question?
I love personally everything that you can learn about Veronica in Dead Money, which is like not even there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
But the other girl is, you know, who it turns out was, you know, the scout that went with her. It's like she's been to the casino, you know, to that area. But she's not even there. You can't even take her.
right, yeah. I mean, you know, in Boone's case, just because I have notes about him in front of me, Boone has this whole backstory about his family and how his family was killed, and actually, like, his wife was sold into slavery, and he wants to get revenge, and I mean, he could be an entire novel just by himself. And there, I mean, I know there are other characters like that where you just, like, you meet one person and then you learn all about them and their family and everything you learn about, like, you know, just all kinds of stuff, and they're not even happening to you, but everything is so in depth that it's like real life, and you can't put that in a book. And I'm not saying that books are not literature. I'm just saying that video games are basically like a kind of an evolved form of literature. I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well. Are you saying, is it because you get to live, like walk in somebody else's footsteps, or? Well, that's definitely part of it, yeah. I mean, you know, the element of choice is a big part of Fallout. It's a big part of, you know, Mass Effect and Dragon Age, and of course the Elder Scrolls. I mean, so that's what I was saying. You could literally just walk past Boone and never even talk to him. I mean, you might have to talk to him for like a couple seconds, but you don't have to. You don't even have to do the main story. You can do whatever you want. And if you're me, you can just like devote your whole playtime just to helping Boone get his revenge, helping him with his PTSD, and you know, focusing on your Fallout boyfriend. So yeah, I mean, the Fallout series is a pretty incredible form of evolved literature, basically. Okay, so then back to the thing where I said some games that I really, really wanted to talk about might not be the most popular games. Okay. Okay, so how many of you have played Shadow of the Colossus? Okay. So did you play the original on PS2? Okay. Did you play the remake on PS4? Okay, yeah. Okay, how about the PS3 version? A few people. Okay. So, Shadow of the Colossus, I realize, is a Sony property. and not everybody has the ability to play Shadow of the Colossus if you don't have a PlayStation. But it's one of my favorite games, and it's a very interesting work of literature, really. Okay, so does anybody know what postmodernism is? Okay, I see like 1 or 2 confident raised hands, but I will say, personally, I've been studying literature for like well over a decade, and I'm still not totally sure. I don't know if anybody's really totally sure exactly what postmodern means. But I think we could say that Shadow of the Colossus is a work of postmodern literature. Now, I wrote about Shadow of the Colossus as an example of postmodernism on my blog about like 10 years ago. It was actually like one of my first blog posts. And at the time, I was like really not sure what postmodernism was, but I was just kind of winging it. I had read, some Virginia Woolf, and I had a general idea, but for the people who didn't confidently raise their hand, I do have a definition here. So the Norton Anthology of Postmodern American Poetry says that postmodernism suggests an experimental approach to composition, as well as a worldview that sets itself apart from mainstream culture and the narcissism, sentimentality, and self-expressiveness of its life and writing. The author then says that you could also title this anthology as experimental or avant-garde. That doesn't help me understand it that much more. But basically, that means that postmodern is kind of weird and just like not typical. Experimental.
Defies convention.
Yes, yeah, it defies convention. Exactly. At least it defies the convention of like modernism. You have something?
So is it trying to describe society from unconventional means, like using a different medium, let's say?
That could be it. I don't think it's about I don't think it has to be about a specific topic, as long as it's telling its story in a very unconventional way. So the main example I think that people would use as a work of postmodernism is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which is kind of like the original Quentin Tarantino style. Everything, like all the chapters are kind of out of order, and it's hard to know exactly what's going on in the story. But I'm not really here to talk about Mrs. Dalloway. So, Shadow of the Colossus, if you've played it all the way to the end, like other people have talked about like kind of the sense of dread that you feel as you're playing the game, because you start the game and it's like, okay, you got this boy and a girl, and the girl might be dead or she might be in a coma or something, and he is going to go and do some quests, and once he finishes these quests, this disembodied voice that he's been talking to is gonna help him get his girl back to life. And that sounds pretty typical from the start. It sounds like maybe a work of chivalry. So you as the player, you're playing as the boy, you do what the disembodied voice has told you to do, and you go out and you find the first boss, and you're like, I'm playing a video game, and I've got this boss monster, and I'm gonna kill it because this is a video game, and that's what I was told to do. But like, as you keep killing these bosses, okay, not only are kind of horrible things happening to the boy, these dark shadows are coming and like, you know, kind of stabbing him, and then he faints, and then, I don't know, and then these statues crumble, and you sort of start to sense, am I doing a good thing? Am I doing something chivalric, or am I doing a bad thing? Like, am I actually the bad guy here? And, you know, but the boy, the character, he wants to save his girl. So you keep going, and the game doesn't give you a choice. The game forces you to be this bad person. So, you know, that's, in that way, that is unconventional storytelling. It's unconventional for a video game. I mean, you expect him, you know, kind of to be like Mario or like Link, and he's got a princess, and he's got to save his princess, and like, obviously, the things that he has to kill are the bad guys. So, but you really do come to realize by the end of the game that he is not doing a good thing. He is, I mean, these creatures that he's killing, a few of them fight back, but in self-defense. And the initial ones that you kill are not really even fighting back in self-defense. They're just like, what's going on? I don't even know why I'm being killed here. So Shadow of the Colossus takes the convention that we expect, not only from video games, not only from the video games that came before it, like The Legend of Zelda, but also from, you know, stories like King Arthur and his Knights, stories that everybody has grown up with, and it turns it on its head. And then the thing that makes it really postmodern, and this is kind of spoiling the end of the game, but also the end of the game is so confusing. Like, how can you even spoil it? But the storytelling becomes very unconventional, because once he kills all of the colossi, and, you know, and the girl comes back to life, or she wakes up, or whatever it is that happens to her, he turns into a baby, and then the game is over. So yeah, if postmodernism means experimental storytelling, or if it means unconventional, or any of the things that I said, avant-garde, yeah, I would say that that's pretty unconventional. So I also wanted to mention that the Epic of Gilgamesh. How many of you have read the Epic of Gilgamesh? Okay, a lot of you. Okay, so yes, and actually Gilgamesh is like a really popular character in like animes. So like in the Fate series, like, yeah, he's one of the hero people, but I don't know if that's like the best like version of Gilgamesh. Like, I think they take some liberties there, but anyway, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's this one part where Gilgamesh is and keep in mind that I wrote this that I'm talking about 10 years ago, and it's been longer since I read the Epic of Gilgamesh, so I might not remember correctly. But for some reason, Gilgamesh, let's see, the adventurers begin to harvest timber and are encouraged by the sun god to attack the guardian of the forest. And I don't really know why Gilgamesh is attacking this guardian of the forest, but he does. And so Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu, which, like, yeah, it's a funny name. They are fighting the guardian of the forest. Oh, I think it's because they just want some wood. They just want, like, some lumber for some reason. So they're like, we have to kill the forest guardian just to get this lumber. And then the forest guardian is begging for mercy, and Enkidu dissuades Gilgamesh from granting it. So, I mean, in this case, Enkidu is like Gilgamesh's friend and not a disembodied voice. But it is the sun god, apparently, who tells them that it's a good idea to attack this guardian of the forest. And I just think this is extremely similar to the Shadow of the Colossus scene where the main character, his name I think is Wander, which is an interesting name. He doesn't even know what's going on. He has no idea what's going on. He's just like, there is this voice telling me that I need to do this, and when I do, it's gonna bring my girl back to life. So yeah, I don't know if that was like intentionally pulled from the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it is, oddly similar. So that's pretty much all that I have to talk about here. I have a lot of other games that I've played that are very literary that I could talk about, but I wanted to see if anybody had any questions or if anybody had any literary games that you want to talk about. I have a microphone if anyone wants to come up and ask a question or say something, so that everybody can hear, because it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard for me to hear when people in the back are asking questions. So, okay. So you wanna?
So I want to find out your take on Life is Strange,
Life is Strange.
First game, and what's your literary take on that, storytelling with that, as well as maybe Telltale's first Walking Dead game. I know that one personally had a influence on me because it made me look at quote unquote single parenthood of a child that's not biologically yours.
Right.
So it's like being the stepdad in that relationship, and protecting and trying to teach, a child after being thrust in a certain situation.
Right.
And I think Life is Strange had a different influence on me in that it really made me look at the relationships and between friends or ex-friends or estranged friends, and as well as what happens when you move away from college, move away to go to college, and then you come back and you try to reconnect with people who maybe didn't go to college. So I was curious as to what your take on those two games.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with the first Walking Dead game. How many of you have played the first Walking Dead game? I see a few people. Okay, first off, the first Walking Dead game took place mostly, I think, in Macon, Georgia. And I lived very close to Macon, Georgia when I played that game, so that was really cool for me. But yeah, all of Telltale's games are just incredible works of literature. And they do have a large element of choice, which changes the outcome of the game. It changes the story that you experience when you're playing. So, I mean, they're definitely interesting to look at as works of literature. You know, I can't personally speak to the parenthood aspect, but did you want to say something about it?
Yeah, just like so like I guess Walking Dead season season of Walking Dead, it has that current element that's like at the forefront of it, and then you know throughout the rest of the throughout the rest of the movies, that kind of takes a bit of a backseat to Clementine who's trying to survive and figure out how to function in this world anymore.
Yeah.
But then interestingly, the last season, she now is taking care of the kid herself.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I feel like it's not, I mean, it's one, it's just kind of classic. Start somewhere at the end, bookending kind of thing with her. But also, I just think it was interesting how it brought the choice of everything into perspective because, you know, all choice-based games face criticism of like, well, this story happens whether you choose one thing or another. Someone dies a different maybe in this time of the world, but you still get where you're going. And that's true, I think, for a lot of life experiences, but I think just bringing that element of choice like into raising a kid yourself again, through Clementine who was influenced by choices you made the first time. I guess it's like it makes me feel like movies like you made less about concrete things that happen and more the characters that you create, which is more for this type for what I imagine. I'm not very sure on it, but that's just what that made me think of, and I love that series. So I wanted to say
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so The Walking Dead and like most Telltale games and the Life is Strange games, like they've all taken like pieces of my soul from me because they're such elaborate, such emotional stories. But you did mention like you do have, and I wanted to say this, you do have an element of choice in these games, more so probably in the Walking Dead games. But eventually, like, if a character is supposed to die, they're going to die. You can't ultimately save them. Usually, like, either, I mean, there were a few cases, I think, where a character, you could save them in the first game, and then in the next game, they're just like, well, they're, you know, some people already had them dead in their first game, and in the second game, they're like, we don't want to have the voice actor do the entire game because, like, a lot of people aren't even going to see that, so the character just dies, like, in the first 5 minutes of the second game. So, in some ways, the elements of choice in the Walking Dead games and in other similar games is kind of fake. But, I mean, I don't know, they're trying. They're trying to do innovative gameplay, and we have to give them points for that. Did you have something?
So as far as video games being a form of telling a story, how do you feel about the perspective of the Assassin's Creed series? How each of the different games involves a time period, but also involves historical events that take place.
Right, okay, so the Assassin's Creed series, and actually let me talk about Life is Strange just really quick, because Life is Strange is not exactly the same as the Walking Dead games. I do feel like I don't want to lump it in. Your choices are a little bit more respected, I think, in Life is Strange. And like ultimately the way that the story ends can be like very, very different based on which choices you make. So I do just want to say that. Assassin's Creed, that's a series that I've always kind of struggled with. Just because, okay, so the whole concept of like the person in the animus, is that what it's called? So you have a person who's like in the animus, which is like a machine that lets them experience the life of a person from history. I struggle with that a lot in that I have issues with now I can't think of the term, but what's that term when you can't immerse yourself in the story because like there's so many issues, and you're like, yeah, but if the person is in the animus, how are they making this happen? And like,
Yeah, suspension of disbelief.
yeah, suspension of disbelief, right? So yeah, I have suspension of disbelief issues with those games because I'm like, how is this really happening? And in the early games, the game actually tells you, it's like your ancestor would not have done that, and then you like have to game over and start over again, and so so I don't know. I mean, I think now that they've been doing this for many years, they've been making these games for many years, I think they have settled into being able to actually do a really good story with that. It's just the early games were just really irritating for me. But I have been putting a lot of time into Assassin's Creed Odyssey recently. I haven't played the Viking game yet, but I think they're doing something really interesting there, and I think that future games have the potential to be, better and better when it comes to storytelling. And also, as I mentioned with the Fallout games, the history is really fascinating. Now, I haven't done a lot of personal research. I do remember one part in Odyssey where I'm playing as Cassandra, and Cassandra is in a room with like all of these famous playwrights and authors and thinkers, Euripides and Aristophanes and all of these famous Greek writers. And I'm not sure if they really lined up exactly that perfectly in time, but I haven't done a lot of research on that, and even if they didn't, it is still very interesting to see how they would interact with each other, to at least imagine how they would have interacted with each other, because they were all great minds who had different viewpoints. So I did really like that scene in Odyssey. And we're actually running out of time, so does anyone else have like one short-ish question?
I was just going to ask, recently I just got into the Ace Attorney series.
Yeah.
And one of the latest entries, The Great Ace Attorney, that series is based off of Sherlock Holmes. I was wondering if you had played that and what are your thoughts on that entry in the franchise?
Which entry are you talking about?
The Great Ace Attorney.
Oh yeah, I haven't played that one yet. I love the Ace Attorney games. But I haven't played all of them yet, so I can't really like speak on a lot of specific things.
What are your thoughts on the series in general, then?
So I think that the Ace Attorney series is kind of almost like its own unique genre. Really the only other games that I can think of that fall into a similar genre would be the Professor Layton games, and they even, if I remember, they did a crossover. Yeah. But like this kind of solving a mystery in this particular way is very interesting to me, and of course I also love the humor. I love cheesy games like that, especially when it's like, it's a murder mystery, but it's extremely cheesy, kind of like 60s Batman. So yeah, I think it's kind of like, because a lot of people try to call the Ace Attorney games visual novels, but they're not quite visual novels. Because you have to do a lot of thinking. You're not just going through a story, and you're not just, I know some visual novels have elements of choice, but you're really not just experiencing a story or a dating sim or anything like that. It's a whole different thing where you have to solve mysteries and prove things in court and whatnot. And I would definitely like to see more games in that kind of genre, especially like indie games or anything like that. I'd love to see more of that. Okay, so that's pretty much the end. So thank you everybody who came. Thank you everybody who stuck around to the end. And if you want to get one of my cards, I've got the website information on there, and there you go. And it's videogamesislit.com. So, and maybe I'll be back another year. I don't know. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the con.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're very few games. I mean, I'm not writing, but I usually know like most places games. But I mean, I've probably heard of it, but I can't like recall. Yeah.
Oh, it's first, it's like a cell shaded PlayStation.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, she'll stop it when she's done.
Yeah.
What are you saying? Oh, yeah. Okay. Which I have, but I don't know.
Oh, well, these two, they're free.
Okay.
Story kind of being like,
Oh, yeah. Which is like really popular right now. Everybody's
These two are like even they're Greek based. So it's stuff there. Those other Greek stories. And I just that kind of makes me like I can help me on that.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah. Yeah, I need to play that. Paper Mario? Oh my god. Oh, the one on the Wii. No, I haven't played that one. Okay. Yeah.
so I use that for that.
Wow. I don't even know why I haven't played that. I don't even own that one. I don't know why. Yeah.
It was very different, but it's always been that story. It was a different spin on the series. Like an RPG. It wasn't an RPG. It was more of a platform RPG. Yeah.
Even though everyone who could all flavors was more than the door, but apparently never
Have you played, like, they have a group of people, right? Or heard of it?
I definitely heard of it, but I haven't been able to play it.
You know, the one thing that is, that's the two of them, but these two, they can do F-Zero games, story, because there's a lot of different elements to it.
That's probably one that I could emulate, right? Like, because I know I'm probably not going to get a physical copy of it.
I don't think one in English even exists.
Oh, really?
No,
Yeah.
it's all game patches.
So yeah, I'm gonna have to try to emulate that.
Yeah, but it's one that has like a lot of twists and turns and a lot of very complicated characters.
Yeah, that's one that people are always talking about, and I'm like, I haven't played it.
Yeah, a lot of it is just like completely rooted in metaphor, and it really is what got me thinking, like, how much storytelling can there be in this?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Oh, I will add that, yeah, if you're talking about Gilgamesh from a Fate, yeah, Fate's a whole rabbit hole in of itself. Like, the Gilgamesh figures, like, he's pretty close, his relationship with his and all that, but like, aside from that, wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean a lot of that series has to be like taken
Very much agrees.
Look at anything space related past, like,
my really good friends, actually, as an English major, and we had a bit of a disagreement at one point over whether games are